Have you ever felt a strange pull toward people who end up hurting you, as if your heart is drawn by a force you cannot name or resist? You meet someone who seems perfect, who lights a spark within you, and yet somehow the same patterns of pain and disappointment keep repeating. Why do we gravitate toward individuals who awaken our deepest wounds even when we know it will hurt? Why does walking away feel impossible, as if leaving them behind would tear a part of yourself apart? And why do moments of brief connection, fleeting kindness, or small gestures of love feel addictive, keeping you tethered to someone who consistently causes suffering? Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, suggested that these patterns are not random or accidental. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But what if that so-called fate, the invisible force that keeps pulling you toward pain, is not destiny at all, but a hidden addiction buried deep within your psyche, silently shaping your choices and desires? What if your heart has been trained to seek out pain in the guise of love, over and over again without your awareness? And the most unsettling part of Jung's discovery is that this cycle is not about the other person at all. It is about parts of yourself that remain hidden, unacknowledged, and unresolved. What he uncovered about these compulsions and how they can be broken is far more disturbing than most people are ready to confront. But before we dive deeper into Jung's extraordinary insights, you need to understand one essential truth.
In his extensive work with patients, Carl Jung began noticing a haunting and recurring pattern. People, regardless of their background, social status, or age, seemed doomed to repeat the same painful relational cycles. They would fall for the same type of individuals over and over again. Partners who were emotionally unavailable, controlling, or even cruel, despite their conscious desire for love, stability, and connection. Jung realized that this compulsion was not a flaw in their character, nor was it simply bad luck. He called it the compulsion to repeat, a mysterious force of the unconscious that drove people to recreate unresolved emotional experiences from the past. This repetition was the psyche's way of attempting to resolve unfinished internal conflicts, but because these conflicts remained hidden, the attempts often ended in frustration and heartbreak. Jung observed that these patterns were deeply embedded in the psyche, often tied to unresolved trauma from early life experiences, neglected emotions, or rejected aspects of the self. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Yet when the unconscious drives the meeting, the transformation can be destructive, leaving the individual trapped in cycles of pain." Jung's insight revealed that the source of these repeated relational injuries is not always external. It is the hidden, unacknowledged parts of our own minds that orchestrate the drama.
Understanding this central theme is the first step in uncovering why we are drawn to those who wound us, and why the path to healing requires looking inward rather than outward. One of Jung's most striking early case studies involved a woman who seemed trapped in an endless cycle of destructive relationships. Each man she became involved with was emotionally unavailable, controlling, or outright cruel. She arrived at Jung's office desperate for understanding, claiming she wanted love and stability, yet every time she encountered it, she seemed to push it away.
Through careful analysis of her dreams and conversations, Jung began to uncover a hidden pattern. Her dreams were filled with haunting images, dark, shadowy figures, locked doors, and flickering flames, symbols of repression, fear, and forbidden desires. These dreams were not random. They were the psyche speaking through metaphor, showing the parts of herself she refused to acknowledge. Jung realized that she was not drawn to cruelty by chance. Her unconscious mind was projecting her unresolved inner conflicts onto the people she attracted. She was unconsciously seeking to heal old wounds by recreating them in the present, hoping for a resolution that had never come. Each painful relationship served as a mirror, reflecting her own shadow back at her, demanding recognition and integration. Until she faced these hidden aspects of herself, the anger, fear, and unexpressed needs, she would continue to attract the same patterns of pain. Jung's work with her revealed a fundamental truth about human behavior. The people who hurt us the most are often not the enemy, but guides showing us the parts of ourselves we must confront to become whole.
Modern psychology has confirmed many of Jung's insights, revealing just how powerful and complex the human psyche truly is. Research shows that people often unconsciously recreate patterns from their early emotional experiences, even when those experiences were painful or harmful. If a person grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, conditional, or mixed with neglect, the brain can become wired to associate emotional highs and lows with attachment. This means that as adults, they may unconsciously seek out partners who replicate that same dynamic, confusing chaos and pain for intimacy and connection. Neuroscience has uncovered the chemical underpinnings of this phenomenon. When we experience moments of emotional intensity, whether joy or suffering, the brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals that reinforce attachment and bonding. This creates a powerful, almost addictive cycle known as trauma bonding, where the highs and lows of a relationship reinforce emotional dependency. From a Jungian perspective, these repeated relational patterns are driven by the shadow, the hidden aspects of the self that have not yet been acknowledged or integrated. The people who hurt us the most are not always inherently cruel. They often serve as mirrors, reflecting unresolved conflicts, unexpressed anger, or unmet needs within ourselves. Jung emphasized, we do not heal by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Modern research supports this, showing that confronting and understanding our unconscious motives is essential for breaking these cycles. The more we ignore the shadow, the more it controls our choices, pushing us toward people and situations that replay old wounds, keeping us trapped in a pattern that feels both familiar and inescapable. Jung described the recurring patterns of painful relationships through a psychological archetype he called the wounded lover. This archetype represents the part of us that seeks healing and redemption through love, often in unconscious and self-sabotaging ways. The wounded lover carries the belief that if they can make someone else love them perfectly, they will finally be whole, finally healed. Yet this pursuit is rarely about the other person. It is about the longing to repair old emotional wounds that have never truly been acknowledged.
The wounded lover's unconscious logic is both compelling and dangerous. If I can fix them, they will fix me. If I can endure their pain, I will finally earn love and validation. Jung observed that this archetype does not operate in isolation. It interacts with other patterns within the psyche, projecting unresolved fears, anger, or shame onto the people we are drawn to. The individuals who hurt us the most often serve as mirrors, reflecting the darkness within us that we refuse to confront. This projection keeps the cycle alive, making relationships feel both irresistible and destructive. The wounded lover is also closely tied to early life experiences, where emotional neglect, inconsistent affection, or trauma laid the groundwork for these unconscious patterns. Understanding this archetype provides a framework for recognizing the source of recurring relational pain. By identifying the wounded lover within, we begin to see that the relationships that once seemed like random misfortune are, in fact, echoes of unresolved internal conflicts, signaling the parts of ourselves that demand awareness, integration, and ultimately, transformation. Breaking the cycle of destructive relationships, according to Jung, requires a courageous and deliberate journey inward. He emphasized that the key to liberation lies in confronting the shadow, the hidden, repressed, or denied aspects of ourselves that unconsciously drive our choices. This process, which Jung called individuation, is not easy. It demands honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to face parts of ourselves we have long avoided. One of Jung's primary techniques for shadow work was active imagination, a method where patients engage in a dialogue with their inner figures, giving voice to emotions, fears, and desires that had been suppressed. Through this practice, the unconscious mind is brought into conscious awareness, revealing the motives behind compulsive behaviors and repeated relational patterns. By acknowledging the shadow, individuals can recognize that the people who have hurt them are often mirrors of their own unhealed wounds. Jung explained, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," highlighting that this confrontation is challenging but transformative. Once the hidden emotions are acknowledged and integrated, the compulsion to repeat destructive relationships diminishes. The individual begins to make choices from a place of self-awareness rather than unconscious drive, breaking free from the addictive pull toward harm. Healing, Jung believed, comes not from avoiding pain or seeking it in others, but from embracing the truths within ourselves. Only then can the cycle end, allowing love, connection, and emotional wholeness to emerge naturally, grounded in awareness and choice rather than unconscious compulsion. Let's return to the woman from Jung's early case study to understand the profound difference between failed and successful integration of the shadow. Initially, she continued to attract men who were emotionally distant and manipulative, each relationship replaying the pain of the last. She was unaware that the patterns were not caused by the men themselves, but by her own unacknowledged emotions and unmet needs. Every heartbreak reinforced the belief that love was dangerous and unattainable, trapping her in a cycle of suffering that seemed impossible to escape. This is the hallmark of failed integration. The shadow remains hidden, projections continue, and the unconscious dictates the course of life, repeating old wounds in new forms. But when she engaged in active imagination and shadow work under Jung's guidance, everything began to shift. She confronted the anger, fear, and vulnerability she had long suppressed. She began to see that the cruel, distant men she attracted were not enemies, but mirrors, reflecting what she had refused to acknowledge within herself. Through this process, she developed self-awareness, emotional resilience, and the ability to choose relationships consciously rather than unconsciously. Her next relationships were no longer compulsive reenactments of pain.
Instead, they became opportunities for mutual growth, understanding, and authentic connection. The wounded lover archetype still existed within her psyche, but it was no longer in control. Jung's work demonstrated that the difference between continued suffering and true healing lies in the courage to face the darkness within. Successful integration transforms heartbreak into insight, chaos into clarity, and compulsions into conscious choice.
Carl Jung never saw the cycle of painful relationships as a curse or a personal failure. Instead, he understood these patterns as the psyche's urgent call for attention, a signal that something within us remains unresolved and in need of recognition. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, and every relationship that ends in pain is a mirror, reflecting the hidden aspects of ourselves that demand awareness. Jung believed that the journey through suffering is not meaningless, it is the path toward wholeness. By facing the shadow, the anger, the fear, the unexpressed desires, we begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves that have been fragmented or denied. This process is not quick or easy, but it is profoundly liberating. Once we bring the unconscious into consciousness, the patterns that once seemed inevitable start to lose their power. We no longer attract relationships that mirror unresolved wounds because we are learning to heal from within. The people who once hurt us are no longer guides to pain, but symbols of the transformation already underway. Jung's teachings remind us that love and connection are not about seeking validation from others, but about recognizing and integrating the wholeness of our own being. We are not broken for loving the wrong person. We are human, navigating the complex landscape of emotion, shadow, and desire. Healing begins the moment we turn inward, embrace our darkness, and step into the light of conscious awareness, creating space for authentic, healthy relationships and a deeper, enduring sense of self.
If you recognize yourself in this story, if you've ever felt drawn to someone who left you in pain, know that you are not alone and you are not broken. The patterns that have brought heartache into your life are not random mistakes. They are signals from your unconscious, guiding you to parts of yourself that need acknowledgement, compassion, and integration. Take a moment to reflect. How many times have you repeated the same emotional cycles, hoping for a different outcome, only to find yourself facing the same type of hurt? Understanding that the people who have hurt you most are mirrors, not enemies, is the first step toward reclaiming your power.
Healing is not about blaming others or avoiding difficult emotions. It is about turning inward, confronting your shadow, and embracing all aspects of yourself with honesty and courage. By doing so, you break the chains of compulsion and open the door to relationships rooted in authenticity, respect, and mutual growth. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever recognized a part of your shadow reflected in someone else? And how did it change the way you view yourself and your relationships?
If this video resonated with you, subscribe and join us for the next exploration into the depths of the psyche, where we will uncover the hidden narcissist archetype when the ego becomes a god. Remember, the journey toward self-awareness and emotional freedom is ongoing, but every step you take brings you closer to understanding, healing, and the possibility of truly conscious love.